Okay, here we are. Hi, everyone. Thank you, dear friends, for joining us in live on the Facebook of the Combat Antisemitism Movement, Zoom, Twitter, and other platforms. I would like first to welcome all of you to the webinar series of the Combat Antisemitism Movement, where we meet new partners. My name is Sacha Rothman-Dratois. I'm the Executive Director of the Combat Antisemitism Movement, and it's a pleasure to see you here today. In this webinar series, we're introducing you to amazing work the partners of the movement is doing. If you can't watch the whole webinar today, it will be uploaded on CAM platform, so please visit our website, combatantisemitism.org, to stay tuned to watch the full recording of this webinar, but also upcoming events. As you know, antisemitism is today a global problem, but it demands an international coalition to fight it. This is what we do. But we can't do it without local organizations that understand the climates in each country, in its city, and in every street where they live. In the last round of violence between Gaza and Israel, we saw how rapidly anti-Israel sentiment turns to Jew hatred in the street of our own countries. Today we have with us an incredible partner that you can see on the screen from the organization called Ireland Israel Alliances, and his executive director, a great friend of CAM, Jackie Goodale. Welcome, Jackie. Thanks you for being with us today and for spending time in the next 20 minutes with all of us.
Thank you very much, Sasha, for inviting me, and thank you for allowing us to just tell the viewers a little bit about the background of the Ireland-Israel Alliance and what we're trying to do.
So thank you, Jackie, and you have been a partner of CAM, I think, almost from the beginning. It was a pleasure working with you until today. I always found Ireland an interesting place for the Jewish communities because you really are the front line of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism at the same place. Unfortunately, we've seen the Irish government condemning Israel each time they can too fast. They also fail in some cases to protect the Jewish communities. So to start the conversation with you, I would love to hear how you feel about that, but mainly how you start the organization, what was the motivation behind launching it, and a little bit about your story so we can know who you are a bit more.
Okay. So the Ireland-Israel Alliance is a grassroots non-profit organisation based in Dublin, Ireland's capital city. We set up in April of 2018 with the aim of bringing clarity to public perception of issues surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We engage with supporters and organisations from both secular and religious backgrounds and from across the political spectrum. My own story of how I got involved with Israel, in a nutshell, I first visited Israel during the Second Intifada back in 2003, and I immediately fell in love with Israel and its people. I visited regularly in the following years, but was never involved politically until 2014, which was during Operation Protective Edge, as we all remember, when I saw the wholly biased reporting from the Irish media. I'd not long returned from the UK, where I'd been living for many years. And I was actually quite shocked with what I saw. I was approached by a guy who used to run an organization here called Irish for Israel, a guy called Barry Williams, great guy. He's not involved in advocacy anymore, but he contacted me and said, "Hey, do you know that there's this organization here called Irish for Israel, and would you like to be a part of it?" And I said, wow, I had absolutely no idea. So I kind of got involved, but I was very much in the background. So I wasn't like going to rallies or, I'd write the odd letter, that kind of thing. So I was actually working here in Ireland. I was working in PR and marketing for an Irish literary festival at that time. And 2 years later, in 2016, I was asked if I would approach the Israeli embassy here in Dublin in order to sponsor an Israeli writer to come to the festival, which I did because the people in the festival, they kind of knew that I went out to Israel regularly, and so they thought I might be a good person to see if we could get an Israeli writer over. So I was absolutely delighted to do that. And that Israeli writer was a lady called Savion Liebrecht. She's a short story writer and playwright, and I believe she lives in Tel Aviv. So it wasn't unusual for festivals to work with foreign embassies. It's quite normal. And that year we actually also worked with the French embassy, and there was talk of us working with the American embassy as well to sponsor writers. So in the event, because I was responsible for the PR and marketing, I sent out some correspondence with the Israeli embassy logo on it, saying that they were sponsoring an Israeli writer. And as you can imagine, the boycott, divestment and sanction movement came down very, very heavily on the festival. And despite my telling them that they should ignore the threats and intimidation, unfortunately, they cancelled the embassy sponsorship, but Savion Liebrecht still came. Her event was much larger than we had originally anticipated because of all the all the talk about it in the media, and because of the big fuss that was made of it. So we actually had to open it up to a larger audience, a larger venue, and she went down really, really well, actually. So that was very good. So that's kind of a little bit of the background about how the Ireland-Israel alliance kind of came into being.
First of all, you're really the front line of the fight against the new modern form of anti-Semitism that we see, which is really the anti-Zionist movement that we see in the street of Europe, which is led by the BDS movement. And we have seen that in Ireland, I think in one of the most prominent way in Europe, with the Occupied Territory Bill that was, I don't know if it was passed exactly in 2018, but how the bill impact the work that you have been doing in Ireland, and how it's impacting not just decision makers in the business community in Ireland, but actually the opinion in the street and the public opinion. I'm asking because we've seen in the past Gaza violence in the street of Ireland, a lot of anti-Israeli demonstration. So from where it's coming from more a grassroots enterprise or from leaded country-based leading anti-Israeli sentiment that we can see?
Okay, well, I mean, the Francis Black Bill came about shortly after we actually started in 2018. I would just like to say that the bill didn't actually pass. It got through both the upper house and the lower house of the Irish government, but it didn't actually pass into law. And I'd like to make that very clear for everybody. So it hasn't been passed. The Francis Black Bill, the so-called Occupied Territories Bill, is basically an immoral and discriminatory bill that seeks to criminalize Irish citizens from trading with Jewish businesses in Judea and Samaria and parts of Jerusalem, with fines of up to €250,000 and or a 5-year jail term. Okay, so that means if I, as a business in Ireland, conducted business with, I don't know, say a business in the Barcan Industrial Estate, for example, or the Jordan Valley, we could actually get a fine of €250,000 and or a 5-year jail term. I mean, that is just unprecedented. And we were disgusted and appalled that Ireland would even consider trying to pass such a bill. So we carried out numerous letter writing campaigns. We wrote articles. We did numerous rallies outside the Irish Parliament. We brought a guy over from Israel who actually works with businesses in Judea and Samaria. And we held a rally in Grafton Street. That's the main shopping precinct in Dublin. And we displayed the goods, and we handed out leaflets to people, and we got some good publicity, which was great. So we were invited to speak on TV and radio. So it really, one of the good things about it was that it actually showed our politicians and our media that not all Irish people are anti-Israel. And I won't say pro-Palestinian, because I don't call these groups that go out with Palestinian flags in Ireland pro-Palestinian. They're just anti-Israel, basically. And that is the point that I've made on a number of occasions. I always say to people that we are not anti-Palestinian, but that sadly many of Israel's enemies are both anti-Israel and anti-Palestinian, because they're more interested in their persistent efforts to demonize, delegitimize, and socially isolate the sovereign state and democratic state of Israel than they are in actually trying to improve the lives of ordinary Palestinians.
Yeah.
So we worked very closely with UK Lawyers for Israel. We produced a written submission at the invitation of the Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs and Trade on why we believed the bill should not and could not be passed into law. So our submission addressed issues such as the wider EU and international context, the likely financial costs of implementing the bill's proposals, and the likely overall fiscal charge on the Irish Exchequer, and whether the bill would impact the religious freedoms under Article 44.2 of the Irish Constitution, and that would affect all religions here in Ireland. So thankfully, the bill was eventually deemed illegal by the then Attorney General, and it effectively died with the previous Irish government. However, the Palestinian lobby in the Dáil and the Irish Senate have now turned their attention once again to its enactment. So it's back on the cards again. We actually took a delegation out to Israel in September 2019, which was great considering we'd only started up a year before. And as the Occupied Territories Bill was very much in the news at the time, it's not so much anymore. No doubt it will come back again, but it was very, very much in the news at the time. So it was wonderful to be able to take 10 Irish people from very different backgrounds, including a former Minister for Defence and Minister for Justice, Alan Shatter, as well as some members of Young Fine Gael, some Christian leaders and others. And we visited places such as the Barkan Industrial Estate, where we saw Palestinians and Israelis working together. In some cases, some of the managers were Palestinians, and they had Israelis working for them. We visited the Jordan Valley, we visited the Golan Heights, and a particularly lovely visit was to the Ziv Medical Center, where we saw...
Jackie, when you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from a news perspective, outside of Israel, it looks like there is no connection between Israelis and the Arab population in Israel. And then when you come to visit Israel, you really realize that something else is happening in the Middle East. And when you look at the occupied bill, this is very shocking because the reality is much different. The benefit of allowing Israelis working with Palestinians in Judea and Samaria is actually changing the economy of the Palestinian people and helping a lot the Palestinian Authority to develop its own business and economy. So all these things, as you said, is counterproductive. It doesn't help to promote the peace process and for sure the independence of the Palestinian people. But allow me to ask a more complicated question about Ireland and maybe the relationship between why it looks in, maybe you will think differently, but on the side, that Ireland, particularly in the region, has a very big anti-Israeli opinion in the street, and especially that sometimes you can look historically wise that the Irish people had to fight for their independence. It was not for granted. They fight very hard to get it. And the same way that the Jews had to fight for their own independence, sometimes you can look at the similarity that these both people had to do together or had to fight, and how we are today in the stage that it looks like, and maybe you will tell me something different, that there is a huge gap between the Jewish state of mind and the Jewish advocacy world and what we see in the street of Ireland. So maybe you can explain how you see that in your opinion.
Okay, well, I mean, to give you a kind of a little bit of the history, there is a common misconception in Ireland, if I may say so, that the colonization of Ireland by Britain can be equated to the issue of Palestine. Okay, but it is not, and that is my firm belief, that you cannot equate the two. The British were never indigenous to the land of Ireland, and they were a powerful and wealthy nation in their own right, with plenty of land already. However, the Jewish people have had a continuous presence in Israel for over 3,500 years, and we know that Jerusalem contains Judaism's holiest site, the Temple Mount, site of the two former Jewish temples. We can ask the question, how many times has Israel offered land for peace? More than 8 times. So we know, those of us here in Ireland who support Israel's right to exist as a sovereign, protected nation state, know that Israel has always been willing to share its tiny sliver of land. But sadly, it appears that nobody wants to listen. But even so, this drawing of parallels between ourselves and the Palestinians as a people colonized for centuries under foreign occupation has a long and vocal history in Ireland. And it started around the time the Zionist movement accepted the partition of Palestine. So during the 1920s and the 1930s, Irish sympathies would have laid firmly on the side of the Zionists, as the Irish drew parallels between historic Irish and Jewish suffering, as you mentioned, remembering the painful experience of large-scale migration in the 19th century. But perceptions soon changed when the Irish people perceived the newly formed state of Israel to look more like an illegitimately established colony established by British armed forces, imposing themselves on an indigenous population. There are other factors, okay? The fact that Ireland was dominated by the Catholic Church at that time didn't help. In October 1948, Pope Pius XII issued an encyclical supporting an international character to Jerusalem. And from that time on, the Irish government endorsed the Vatican's call for international supervision of Jerusalem and its holy sites. Fast forward to the late 1960s, the sectarian conflict known as the Troubles began, and which was seen by many as a painful reminder of Ireland's struggle with British imperialism. And that is when Ireland turned its full attention to the plight of the Palestinian Arabs in the Middle East. Then, in February 1980, Ireland was the first EU member state to call for the establishment of a Palestinian state without any agreed parameters. And to this day, our Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney, supports recognition of a Palestinian state at some future juncture. And sadly, Ireland was also last to welcome an Israeli ambassador to Dublin in December of 1993. So we were the last EU member state to actually welcome an ambassador.
Also, only in 1963 or 61, only Ireland recognized the state of Israel. So it took almost 20 years for Ireland to recognize Israel, which is also...
That's right. That's right. So this Irish fixation with Palestine kind of continues to this day. And, you know, as I say, it's not just one factor, it's a number of factors contributing to this.
Okay,
for
great.
Sure.
So, listen, I would love to hear now, because that was kind of the background of the hatred that we can see in a complicated relationship. But let's speak about what you do as an organization on a daily basis to reach out to government officials, political parties, to combat this hatred, and maybe also to end on a positive note. What do you think can be a game changer for the Jewish community in Ireland to build a more positive relationship between the government, but also other faith-based group and organization in Ireland?
Okay. Well, we work very closely with the Jewish community here, and the Jewish community in Ireland is obviously you know, very concerned, as are many other communities here, who support Israel's right to exist as a protected sovereign state. A BISA report released yesterday showed some disturbing figures of an analysis of Google Trends. According to that report, Ireland has one of the highest scores outside of Arab countries for searches on boycott Israel, as well as anti-Semitic search terms such as Heil Hitler and Sieg Heil, which I found very, very disturbing. Now, the absolute score of searches for the boycott Israel term in the US equaled Norway's at 1/3 that of Ireland, meaning that in Ireland, there was a whopping 240 times the propensity to search those terms than there were in the US. So we're liaising constantly with the Jewish community here, who in turn are liaising with the broader worldwide Jewish communities and finding ways to combat this evil. There are some who think that the surge in these search terms may be internet bots, as it were, trying to show that Ireland is actually more anti-Israel than it actually is. I don't really know. You know, that's something that we need to engage with, probably directly with the social media companies. But one good thing that we're very happy about is that Israel's 6th president, Chaim Herzog, was born in Ireland. He was educated in Dublin. And in 2018, the centenary of his birth was celebrated at the Foreign Affairs headquarters in Dublin. So we're therefore obviously very pleased to see that his son, Isaac Herzog, has been elected Israel's new president. And we certainly hope...
Incredible, I didn't know about that.
You didn't know about that? Okay. So we're very, very happy. Yes, you see, there's all these connections. So we're obviously very, very happy that Isaac Herzog is Israel's new president, and we certainly hope that his appointment can help to foster better relationships and to repair some of the damage that has been done. But I mean, talking about interfaith and intercultural collaboration, we believe that's very important. And we also work very closely with the Irish branch of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, who in turn work closely with the Jewish community. So we've got a good network going. So we've undertaken a number of projects with them, and we continue to do so. We speak at the ICEJ seminars and meetings, and they speak at ours. We also work with a number of pastors here. There's one particular pastor, John Ahern of All Nations Church. I'm going to give him a shout out because he totally gets it and he's not afraid to speak. He gave a powerful speech at our rally. We did an Israel rally 2 weeks ago outside the Israeli embassy in Dublin. He gave a powerful speech, as did Paul Coulter of the ICEJ. There's also a group called Irish Christian Friends of Israel who speak out in defense of Israel, and they also did their own rally before us. However, and I will say this about the whole area of interfaith dialogue, because it's very important. I don't know how important it is maybe in other European countries. I know it's an issue in the States, but it's very important that in the whole area of interfaith dialogue, we need to ensure that we challenge narratives that seek to replace Israel with Palestine. Okay, and this is happening. We must ensure that churches are not used as yet another vehicle to make anti-Israel extremism appear respectable, mainstream, and humane. Okay, so we hear lots now about social justice, which is obviously it's kind of wrapped up in the whole kind of intersectionality thing and critical race theory and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, we say again and again, Israel cannot be used as the eternal scapegoat. Okay. And because the Jewish community in Ireland is so small, there is not the pushback you would see, say, in the UK, for example, and organizations that promote a Christian anti-Zionist perspective are not adequately challenged. And I'll just go back a little bit to the Occupied Territories Bill, the so-called Occupied Territories Bill. We know, for example, that individual Catholic bishops here in Ireland, a Church of Ireland priest, and Christian development charities such as Trócaire and Christian Aid are at the forefront of support for the discriminatory and illegal Occupied Territories Bill. Okay, so I'll repeat again, this bill, you know, it's been described as the most aggressive boycott measure targeting Israel, the national homeland of the Jewish people in European history. And there are some Christians who are behind it, and they are preaching a form of replacement theology. So, yes, we're all for interfaith dialogue, and we have wonderful relationships with many Christian organizations here in Ireland. But as I said again, we need to ensure that their narrative is not trying to replace Israel
Yes.
with Palestine.
So, Jackie, thank you very much for that. We're supposed to speak for 20 minutes. We're already 30 minutes in the webinar.
Really?
Yes, it's wonderful to listen to you. And
Oh
while
my
we were
goodness.
thinking and ask if those that are watching have some questions. So we're going to go rapidly over the 2 questions that we already received. And meanwhile, if anyone that is watching live has any other question, please send it and we'll try to answer all of them before we wrap up. So we're going to try to answer rapidly, but I think that the answer will be short. The first question, I don't have the full name, I just see BE on the screen. How does the Irish Church and faith interact now to undo the harm done by the Catholic Church in the past? I think that you probably answered the part of it. So just if you have anything to add that you didn't mention right now.
Yeah, look, I think if you know, the Catholic Church in general would not kind of be anti-Israel. These are just kind of groups. These are groups of people within the churches. So I wouldn't like to label, and I wouldn't label the Catholic churches as anti-Israel, because they're not. I grew up in a Catholic background. I went to a Catholic school right the way from 4 years old to when I left. I never heard anything anti-Semitic being said in those schools. So we're just looking at those groups that are particularly driving an anti-Israel agenda, and we can identify those who are. So I wouldn't include the Catholic Church in that per se.
Okay, thank you. And I think that we have a question that will be rapidly answered as well from Miriam Moffat, that she's asking, as British citizens, as an Irish citizen living in London, if she's brought a product from the so-called occupied Israel, can she be arrested if she
No.
arrives in Ireland? No, also
No, no,
because
no.
the bill
I
didn't
want
pass.
to I want to stress this again. The bill has not passed. The bill is not law. The bill is just, it's kind of sitting there waiting to be enacted. As I say, the Palestinian lobby in both houses of the Irish Parliament are itching to get their fingers on it again, but it is not law, no. And I don't believe it will be law because it's illegal. It's illegal under EU trading laws. Unfortunately, I would love the Irish government to say that they will not pass it because it's immoral and discriminatory, but they won't pass it because it's simply illegal.
Okay, that's very good. So Miriam, you're safe. You don't need to be worried about that. I would like, before we wrap up, obviously you're working, as I said in my opening remarks, you're the front line. You're working in Ireland, in a small country, and we are here to help. We are a global organization, 300 partner organization of the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. We have 200,000 people, individuals working with us. What we can do to help you doing your advocacy work, to fighting for the Jewish people, to fighting for Israel. And I think that we are a platform for organizations like you. So what is your message to all the Combat Anti-Semitism movement affiliated organization, members and followers? So feel free just to make your call right now.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you for having contacted us right from the very beginning, Sasha. It's wonderful to be involved with the Combat Anti-Semitism movement and with other organisations. We keep getting told here in Ireland that we have no support, that Israel has no support in Ireland, but we know different. So I think it's very, very important for all of us, organisations and individuals, to come together, to support each other, to attend each other's webinars, to see what each other is doing. So I just say thank you for this opportunity. I'm hoping that there might be people out there who didn't realize we exist, who now know that we do. And if so, please visit our website. We've got a really good website, if I may say so myself. It's at irelandisrael.ie. We are also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We produce regular articles on our website, and go in and have a look at the brilliant rally that we did 2 weeks ago. Got lots of great photographs there and lots of good videos. So so thank you.
Wonderful. First of all, wonderful, Jackie, to the work that you do. Thank you very much for everything we do. I hate to end without asking the question that I receive. So we're going to do a last question I received from Lawrence. Lawrence is asking, what are we do in Ireland when the civil libertarian like Michael McDowell, a pro-Palestinian, pro-BDS person, is doing what he can do to fight back? So first of all, Lawrence, you need to join the Ireland-Israel alliances. I think that's the first answer to your question. And to be happy, but Jackie, what you will recommend to fellow Irish citizens to fight back?
Okay, well, look, I mean, what we can do, we send out emails asking people at particular junctures to write to their elected representatives. So I would say just keep writing to your elected representatives. You can find who your elected representatives are if you go into mytd.ie and write to them. Let them know that there are voices in Ireland who that there are more voices than they think. Who are not anti-Israel, right, and who support Israel. So that's one thing to do. Another thing to do is to write letters to the media, write into the Irish Times, write to the Irish Examiner, the Journal. If you're on social media, go in and put comments under the articles that are put in there. Come out to our rallies. I mean, we used to do a lot more in 18 and 19, 28 and 2019, you know, before the whole COVID thing kind of came around. But hopefully we'll get out onto the streets a little bit more now. I do recognize Lawrence's name. I think he is actually, he does actually subscribe to our newsletters. So yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. And we will give out some information on more of our campaigns in the coming days and weeks.
Thank you, Jackie. So now that we finalize this conversation, I would like to use the words of David McKevitt that is writing here on the comments. Thank you, Jackie, for making the complex topics easy to understand. Yes, it is complex. It is not easy. And for myself, I learned a lot today. So I would like to thank you on behalf of all the Combat Anti-Semitism movement, all the people I've watched today. It was very enriching to listen to you, and we stand ready to help you in any way we can. And I will just help you a little bit more. Jackie gave you the link of our website. She is almost a one-woman show dealing with a big operation in Ireland. So if you can help going on the website and you want to donate and to support the organization, feel free to do it. And thank you, Jackie, today. If you have any closing words on your end.
Yes, I would. Well, first of all, thank you again for the opportunity. And yes, not quite a one-woman show, but I do have a very, very good team of volunteers who do fantastic work behind the scenes. I won't mention them by name because some of them don't want to, you know, they kind of just work quietly behind the scenes. But I wouldn't be able to do what I do without them. They do great work. So yeah, I'd like to thank the volunteers. And I'm also very, very glad that to hear that I was able to make a complex situation sound a little bit easier. Yes, it is very complex, and there are so many angles. So I'm glad if it made sense, and glad to be of help in making things a little bit clearer.
Yeah. So I see that we have more questions from Michael and Annette, and I'm sorry that we need to end right now because we are 40 minutes in the webinar. So I will send a question to Jackie and with the emails of Michael and Annette, and then you will be able to answer their questions. So thank you again. I invite everyone to visit the website of combatantisemitism.org to watch our next opening events, next upcoming webinars with partners and other activities that we're doing. So thank you everyone for being with us today, and see you soon.